The 251 is the bread and butter of the jazz pianist. It's at the very foundation of the music that we love to play. But sometimes we want to make tunes uniquely our own. We want to express our own unique sounds in our playing. And to do that, we need some substitutions and alternative things that we can play when we see a 251. We're going to stick here in the key of G major. That means our bass 251 is an A minor 7 to a D7 to a G major 7. A really good place to start is just by substituting the 5 chord for a sus chord. So instead of D7, we're going to play D sus. And I like to play that by playing a C major triad over a D in the root. Another thing we could do would be just forget about the A minor chord altogether. The A minor and D7, the 2-5, together function as a dominant, but the D7 by itself is perfectly fine to be a dominant. So you could just extend the D7 forward and play it the whole time. Now the nice thing about having the A minor chord there is that it creates movement between the two chords. But if we remove the A minor, it opens up the ability for us to create movement over the D7 in a different way. So one option for that would be that we could play our D suspended chord first, and then move to the D7 dominant. Another thing you could do would be just play two different D7 chords. Maybe you use different inversions or something. So perhaps we could play a D7 with a 9, and then in the second half we could go to a D7 with a flat 9. You could do that same idea from a D9 to a D sharp 9. Or you could do something similar by starting with the D7 sharp 9 and then moving to the D7 with the flat 9. Another really common move is to change our A minor 7 chord into an A dominant 7 chord. This creates what's called a secondary dominant. Basically, the A7 is the 5 of our D7 chord, and our D7 chord is the 5 chord of G. We've kind of chained them together. One of my favorite 251 sounds is this move, but where you use a sharp 9 on the A7, and then we use a flat 13 on the D7. So these secondary dominants work so well because you go around the circle of fifths. Anytime you move around the circle of fifths using dominant chords, things tend to resolve nicely. So we could extend that by 2 more chords and basically go 4 places around the circle instead. So instead of just a 2-5, we could do a 3-6-2-5. Just make them all dominant chords. Now we have 4 chords we have to play in the place of 2, so the chords are going to move twice as fast. But this is a classic turnaround sound that you hear in the blues and in standards and all kinds of places. Now you can spice up this 4-chord turnaround by adding extensions and alterations to these dominant chords however you want to. If you like this kind of lesson where we focus on one really small idea, play exercises, and put it in tunes right away, you will love my Jazz Fundamentals course. There's over 80 lessons like this in that course, and in that course we cover everything from scales to chord voicings to comping to making solo lines to playing as an accompanist to different song styles. We have breakdowns of different songs. We talk about Barry Harris techniques. If you want to learn more about all those lessons or try a few of them for free, there's a link down in the description to get started. There's a coupon code for 30% off down there too. Now, while we're looking at substitutions for the 5 chord, here's one that I don't see people talk about all that much, which is to play a 4 minor chord for the 5. So instead of D7, we're going to play C minor 7. Another thing we could do would be to substitute our 5 chord D7 for the chord that's a tritone away. The tritone is 3 whole steps above. So from D, our tritone is A flat, and you can just straight up replace D7 with A flat 7. Notice how this substitution to use A flat 7 creates a nice chromatic movement in the bass. This is one of the reasons that the tritone substitution works so well. We can do the same thing over our 2 chord as well. So let's leave our D7 in place, but now instead of A minor, let's play its tritone, E flat minor. This tritone substitution for the 2 also introduces nice chromatic movement in the bass. Both of these tritone substitutions work really well on their own individually, but you can play both of them also. E flat minor to A flat 7, and then land on our G major. A few minutes ago, we talked about how the 2 and the 5 work together to have dominant function. That's why we could get away with only playing the 5 chord. Well, Barry Harris used to do this move where he would only play the 2 chord, and he would specifically use the 2 chord from this tritone substitution instead. So Barry said we could replace our D7 chord with the tritone substitution of the 2, meaning we would play E flat minor instead of D7. This can be a little bit heady to process while you're trying to play live, and so my shortcut is just to remember that instead of the 5-7 chord, I can play a minor chord on the sharp 5 instead. D7 is the 5 chord, E flat minor is the sharp 5. As we go through these substitutions and other ideas, we have to keep Josh's golden rule of jazz in mind. That is, the melody and the harmony have to work together. As long as the melody note sounds good over the chords, then you're good to go. We have to keep these in mind because some of these substitutions we're about to talk through are not going to work over every single melody note. It's up to you and your ear to decide whether or not a specific substitution works with the melody you're playing. When we talked about our turnaround progression, we talked about how we start with the D7 chord, and then we could go back around the circle of fifths to find 3 more chords that we could chain in front of it. We can do this same turnaround idea, but instead of starting from D7, we can start from the tritone substitution. So that gives us F to B flat to E flat, and then A flat 7. You could treat all 4 of these chords as dominant chords if you want, and you can extend them and alter them just like we did before. Sometimes I like to think of these as 2-5 pairs, like an F minor to B flat 7, and then an E flat minor to A flat 7. Next, we could move a little bit more outside by using what's called the backdoor progression. The backdoor 2-5-1 exploits an interesting thing about dominant chords, which is that they like to resolve up by a whole step. So with our 1 chord here on G major, we could use a dominant chord that is a whole step below. That's F7. We know that F7 chord will resolve up nicely to G major. If we use that F7 and we create a 2-5-1 that has the F7 as the 5, we end up with this backdoor progression. That would be a C minor to F7 to G major. Both C minor and F7 are outside the key of G major, so this is a great opportunity to introduce some new scales and new sounds into the 2-5-1, but you gotta be really careful about Josh's law to make sure that these also work with the melody note. While we're introducing different sounds outside the key, we could also try some modal modulation. We've been playing a 2-5-1 in the key of G major, but what if we pretended that we were in G minor? We're still going to land on G major. That's important, but we're going to treat the 2-5 as if we're playing notes from the key of G minor instead. That means we're going to play an A half diminished chord to a D7 flat 9. This is pretty close to our traditional 2-5-1, but with some subtle minor flavors I think is really nice. A few months ago, I learned a brand new chord voicing from my friends at Open Studio. They call them moo chords. And the moo chord is basically just a sus2 chord in our right hand, 1, 2, and 5. And then instead of the root, we play the 3rd on the bottom. I think they were inspired by this from Steely Dan's mu chords. If you combine these and play the 2, the 5, and the 1, all using these moo chord voicings, you get what I call the moo 5-1. I'm really hip to this sound right now. I love the spiciness of the minor chords, contrasted with the floatiness of the major chords. I think it just creates a really modern, unique sound. If you're also a fan of Open Studio and their great jazz content, let's tell them how much we love these moo chords by leaving a bunch of cow emojis down in the comments. This last one is definitely the most advanced of our sounds, but it's also one of my favorite go-to sounds. This one starts with an A minor 9 chord, and then when we get to the D7, we're going to do this diminished scale move. The way that I think about this is I'm playing a diminished 7th chord, but the top note has been moved up by a whole step. And then you bring it down to where it should be, and then you invert the whole diminished chord down an inversion and do the move again. And you can kind of move down the keyboard making this move. We're going to resolve that diminished scale move to the major 7 of our G major 7, and then we're further going to resolve the major 7 down to the major 6. There's just such great movement in this one. You have two pieces of homework to take away from this. The first one is you should start learning these in other keys. Eventually, we want to get to where you can play these in all 12 keys rather fluently. But you also should start putting these into tunes right away. Before you jump off to go do that, though, stick around for a second and watch this video that I picked for you.